Hi, I'm Commander Keith Parks, Chief of Police for the City of Thousand Oaks, and welcome to what I think is going to be a very memorable episode of Living History here in Thousand Oaks, because I have two very exciting guests, and I want to welcome retired Ventura County Sheriff Department Chief Deputies John Chamberlin and Merle Hollis to the set. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And you know what's so interesting about this program is that we're talking about Thousand Oaks 30, 40 years ago, when you two started out as young patrol deputies for the Ventura County Sheriff Department. And let's kind of go back to those days. And John, start with you. What year did you join the Sheriff Department?
1950.
1950. And Merle?
I joined the Ventura Police Department in 49.
Okay. And then came over.
Then transferred to the Sheriff's Department.
Okay. And Merle, for you, that was about what year?
August 50.
Of 1950 as well.
Yeah.
Now, 1950, I think we were talking a little bit earlier. John, you were the what number deputy on the department?
26 man on the department.
And we compare that today, we have about eight or so hundred
Right.
deputy sheriffs, sworn officers on the department. And
It's changed a little bit.
It's changed a little bit. What was it like being a young deputy in those days?
Well, it was exciting. I know all the time that I was on the Ventura Police Department, we were all on the same radio frequency, the Highway Patrol, Oxnard, Ventura, and Ventura City. And I'd be patrolling a certain few blocks in Ventura and hear all these deputies out in the county getting calls and doing all kinds of things, and I couldn't stand it. I had to get up there.
And so you came over to the Sheriff Department because it seemed to be a little more of an exciting life. I think probably the deputy sheriff probably had a little more, I guess, responsibility, more areas they had to cover.
Well, they had more responsibility on their own. The reason I got on the department was the people of Saticoy. It was election time and Howard Durley was running for sheriff, and they got on him and they wanted more protection in Saticoy. So he promised that he'd put a resident deputy out there if he got elected. But when he got elected, well, I was the one.
So you moved to Saticoy, and you were the sheriff in Saticoy.
That's right.
For
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Okay. Did we have a similar type operation in Thousand Oaks?
No, I don't know how it's handled now.
No, back then, did we have a resident deputy
Yes.
during those days, Merle?
Yes.
What was that like?
His name was Bob Gallman, and we, the whole county was under resident deputies. Ojai, Santa Paula, Fillmore, Moore Parks, Thousand Oaks, and Oxnard. We had resident deputies that lived in all of those areas. Bob Gallman, when I went to work, was the resident deputy here. I started out in Camarillo, but I was only there a short while, and he transferred me to Moore Park. There I had all of Moore Park, Simi, Santa Susana, clear to the county line. And as John said, in those days it was 24 hours a day, most of the time 7 days a week. If you were allowed to take one day off if you could stay hid somewhere.
So it was kind of like the Old West. You were the town sheriff
That's
or the
right.
town marshal.
Every time you caught a call, no matter what time it was, you had to handle it. And you were responsible for all calls in your given area.
Now, if you made an arrest in Thousand Oaks or Saticoy or Moore Park or Simi, where did you book somebody in those days?
Well, go ahead now.
I had a little 2-cell holding cell in Moore Park, and the guys from Camarillo and Thousand Oaks would bring them over there, particularly if they were just not necessarily going to court, just sobering them up or something. Which brings up a story that Denny Gillette always on me about. The deputy in Camarillo arrested a man on Sunday night, brought him over to the jail in Moore Park, and called me and asked me to turn him loose the next morning when he sobered up. I told him, sure, no problem. Well, the next morning I forgot him. I got busy. That following Thursday, the man's daughter called me, wanted to know when I was going to feed him. Excuse me. He said he was getting kind of hungry. So I went over and a little bit cautious about opening the door, but he was fine. I told him, come on, we'd go eat. He said, no, I'd rather you let me go home.
I'll bet you he never got drunk again.
No, we didn't see any more of him.
I had a rather unique area. I had Saticoy, El Rio, and Nyland Acres district, and that was divided into 3 court districts. So anybody that I arrested, depending on where it was, I either took them to Ventura or to Oxnard or to Camarillo to court. And there was a lot of chasing around.
I can imagine you had a lot of driving to do.
Yeah. And then you handled your own case. If you locked him up, you went and got the complaint, and you took him to court and followed the case all the way through.
So you started out early on, rural areas. You had Moore Park and you had Saticoy. Eventually you end up here in Thousand Oaks, or else you handled some different calls up here. And I know we were talking a little bit earlier, the myth of the Black Panther here in Thousand Oaks. And maybe one of you could tell us that story of where that panther came from and what occurred. Because we're sitting on the site of the old jungle land right now.
Yeah, it was here that a Black Panther got loose out of Goebel's jungle land. And there was a lot of us deputies out here looking for him. People were scared to death. And we were going up and down the barrancas. And we finally found the panther, and it was under one of the buildings here in the jungle land. And they tranquilized it and got it back. But there's been Black Panther sighted besides that in the valley, and Merle and I were hunting up on the Russell Ranch.
That's now Westlake.
Yes.
People may not know what Russell Ranch is. That's where Westlake is.
And early morning, we was up there riding along the Jeep, the fog just lifting, and we looked over across the mountain, and there lay a Black Panther, and he was about 75 feet from the crest of the hill. And I leveled down, and I missed him when I shot. And before Merle could get a shot, that Black Panther had cleared over the top of the hill. So I don't know where he is now.
You never know. Maybe there's an old Black Panther still roaming around the hills.
Right.
Well, I'm a graduate of Newbury Park High School, and our mascot was the Panthers.
Yeah.
It was named after
Yeah.
that missing Black Panther. Now, you know, something else I find interesting, and we need to talk about it. John, you were the very first police chief for the city of Thousand Oaks when the city incorporated in 1964, I believe.
Yeah, that's correct.
And what was it like being chief of police for Thousand Oaks in those days?
Oh, it was enjoyable. I forget what the name of the first city
Manager.
was.
I can't think of his name.
I don't either,
I've
but
known him for years.
We become very good friends and got along well with the city council, and
How many officers did you have working for you in Thousand Oaks?
Gee, I don't know. There was about 20, I think.
Yeah, there wasn't any more than that, I'm sure.
And we have about 100 right now.
Yeah, yeah. We, of course, we had the contract with the city, and sometimes when the city cars were sick or something, we had to bring them in from the county. So the county kind of suffered a little bit by not having the patrol because we had to keep it up for the contract.
Had to maintain the contract for
Yeah.
the city. And you had a patrol force, and I believe you had a couple detectives out here as well.
Yes, but back then the detectives were controlled by Captain Parrish out of the main office.
In Ventura.
I just had supervision over them while they were here, but he really had the control over them.
And the first police station in Thousand Oaks was located where?
On Arbolas,
And Moore Park Road?
yes.
And there's a house. It was a house.
It was a house. It was a converted house, yes.
And it's still up there. It's right across the street from the fire station.
Is the parking lot still there?
Parking lot is still there.
Is that right?
And so it's, we've gone quite a ways. We had that station, and then, of course, we moved from there to the station on Olson Road
Yeah.
that we just left about, actually 12 years ago now.
Has that been that long?
Yeah, I think you opened the station up on Olson Road about 1969. And then we moved out of there 12 years ago into the current station on Olson
Yeah.
Road.
I haven't been in the current station.
Oh, I have to have you up there.
I'd like to go. I'd like to go.
We had a little hassle in that parking lot on Olson Road.
What was that?
I got myself in trouble with that. There wasn't enough parking space on the building for the cars, so down in front was quite a large area, but there was a gully through it and wasn't level. So I was an equipment operator. I borrowed a motor grader from a friend of mine. I went down there and leveled that and put a road down to it, and that was our parking lot. And the county didn't think I should have done that. So,
Well, we needed that parking lot.
oh yeah, we needed it bad, and I had to petition them to do something with it, and they kept dragging their feet. So.
Now, something I want to point out, we talk about buildings and such, and Merle, you brought this key here, and I don't know if I can show that, or if you can pick that up, Mike. That's a key that commemorates the dedication of the City Hall in 1973, which is a building which is at 401 Hillcrest, which is probably it was a very, very popular city hall amongst all the people who work there and the public, and currently the National Park Service is there, as well as Caneo Park and Recreation. That's their headquarters now.
Mhm.
So the city just finished renovating that building, so it's getting a second life serving the community with the Park and Rec and National Park Service.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful facility now, but you were there for the
Yeah.
dedication of that building. And this is the key, 1973. I was directing cars in the parking lot for the grand opening that day. I was one of the cadets in the station, so I remember that well. Now, Merle, when you guys were kids, you grew up together.
Right.
Where was that?
Simi.
Simi Valley.
We left Simi after graduation. It was end of the start of World War II, and we both went into the service. And then after the war, I came back and was living in Moore Park, and went into the sheriff's office a few years later.
Now, one of the cases you were telling me about earlier, you had an interesting investigation that you handled here in Thousand Oaks when the old post office got
Right.
burglarized.
Yeah, that was back during resident deputy days. Bob Gallman was the resident deputy here, and he called me one morning, and we'd have to help each other from one area to the other. And I'd come over to give him a hand, and they had burglarized the post office, and apparently couldn't open the safe, so they hauled it off, put it in a car, and they stole all kinds of stuff to make money orders with. Took the stamps and everything it took to cash them. Well, later that day we found the car recovered, and the safe was out of it, and it was beat to pieces with sledgehammers and so forth, but they never did get it open. And it wound up that we arrested the first man that day, that evening, and got information from him and arrested the second one the next day. The third day we arrested the third suspect in Las Vegas, and we had never been home. We just followed it straight through.
You just
Straight
jumped
through.
on the trail
Yeah.
and just went after them.
Followed it straight through. But that was kind of the way that the resident deputies did in those days.
Now, this would have been the early 50s.
Yes.
How many people were living in the Caneo Valley in those days? What do you think it was?
I wouldn't even hazard a guess. There wasn't very many.
Not very many.
And really, all the residential areas were pretty much around Old Town, what we call Old Town now,
Yeah.
down Moore Park and Hampshire Road area. We didn't
Yeah,
even,
there wasn't anything out on Moore Park Road.
and we didn't even have a freeway in town because I think it
No.
was just Ventura Boulevard at the
Ventura
time,
Boulevard
right.
was it.
which is now Thousand Oaks Boulevard.
Moore Park Road was just a bunch of ups and downs.
Yeah.
It was 2-lane highway, and
Okay.
there wasn't much there.
Now, John, we have, one of our council members, Denny Gillette, was the chief of police as well. In fact, I worked for him as a traffic officer out here when Denny Gillette was the chief of police.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you had a story to talk about Denny when he first wanted to become a deputy. Where were you living at that time?
I was living up in the Meadows tract on Thousand Oaks. And
This had to be about, what, 1962 or so?
yeah, about around there. And telephone rang one day, and it was Denny. I didn't know him, but he wanted to come up and talk to me. And I told him to come on up. And pretty soon he knocked on the door, and I let him in. And he told me that he'd like to get on the sheriff's department. And after talking with him for some time, he seemed like a very good candidate for that. And I told him that I would help him in any way that I possibly could. But Denny didn't need my help. He's a smart young fella. And he sailed through the exam without any problem, come out top gun in the academy, and has done very well ever since.
And
Real proud of him.
he worked for you, I believe,
Oh, yes, he
for
did.
quite a while on the
Yeah.
department.
Yeah, he did.
Now, John, when did you retire?
76.
And Merle, you retired?
1977.
Okay. And so both of you guys, you retired a year before I came on. You retired 2 months after I
I really
joined the
went out
department.
in 75. I was off for a year with a heart attack, and then retired in 76.
Okay. And both retired as chief deputies, which is really the number 3 position on the department.
Yeah.
Tend to have 2 or 3 or 4 chief deputies at a time. So when you retired, John, what were you responsible for the last couple of years that you worked on the department?
I was in the jail, responsible for the jail.
And we just had the jail on Poli Street
Yeah.
at the time.
Yeah. Well, I had that. You had the honor
And the honor
farm,
farm.
and you had out at the Air Force Base. You had work furlough, and had a cage out here at
On Olson Road.
Olson Road.
Okay. And Merle, when you retired, what were you in charge
I was
of?
chief of the criminal division.
Investigations. Was that?
Criminal division, patrol,
Oh.
everything criminal.
Okay, great. When your offices both were on Poli Street at the time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
At the old station, okay. What was it like in the 50s here in Thousand Oaks? What was the style of life? How did was it pretty much people who lived here, worked here? Did they commute to Los Angeles? Did they, were they pretty much ranchers or?
It was pretty much ranchers, Keith. The people in those days were extremely helpful with law enforcement. You didn't hardly run across anyone that was belligerent, or it was out of the ordinary if that happened. And people were always ready to help you. If they didn't, a deputy with his closest help 20, 30 minutes away would be in trouble if but there was always someone that would give you a hand.
So you always relied upon the citizens
That's right.
to help you out because you were pretty much alone out here.
That's right. Your closest help most of the time was at least 20, 30 minutes away. So you kind of learned to depend on them, and of course they depended on us.
It was nothing really before Jans and Goldberg started building here, and they really built up prior to American Hawaiian, and but that's when the growth started. Is when Jans and Goldberg started building.
You saw the housing tracts off of Moore Park Road started
Yeah,
to be
yeah,
developed, and
that was
then
all.
eventually the Westlake area. Yeah. And I know we were talking earlier, I remember being as a young child growing up in Thousand Oaks, it was always a treat when Nick Costa, the sheep herder, would come to the school and bring 3 or 4 sheep because we all grew up watching his sheep just blanket the hills here in Thousand Oaks.
Yeah.
And I think you guys knew him real well.
Yeah, Nick was quite a fella. He used to always have barbecues, and he did them for the American Hawaiian, and he's always saying that we're having bear meat. And but I
Those
don't know.
days, there was a lot of open ground. The deer hunting was excellent around here. Every year we would fill our tags with deer. That was no problem because there was good hunting all around. And we'd have quite a few barbecues with that venison.
Any wild bear spotted out
No,
here?
no,
We
no.
were too far away from the mountains for
Yeah.
That was just Nick Costa.
that. Just Nick Costa and his bear, right? Yeah, well, I can remember the sheep all lined up on Moore Park Road and being, my parents were stuck in the intersection. We can't get through because Nick was
Yeah.
running across from one side of town to the other.
This area was quite an area for the movies. The movies were here all the time. Wagon Train and
Rawhide.
they held Pork Chop Hill out here. They all the time. They were shooting movies here all the time. And
Gunsmoke had a big
Yeah,
set over
yeah.
there too.
Where Wildwood is.
Yeah.
Did you get out to any of the movie sets to watch them
we
film
worked
at all?
them.
You worked them?
Worked a
We
lot
worked
of
them.
Well, did you meet any of the old-time stars?
Yeah, and Gregory Peck and of course Joe McRae was all him and what was that Wagon Train? What was there? Clint Eastwood, one was in
That
it.
was for Rawhide.
That's Rawhide, yeah. Well, that was here too.
Now, the
Joel McRae was a good friend. I'm well acquainted with him. We used to.
and Joel
visit.
was really a pioneer
Yes, he
here in
was.
the Conejo Valley, and
Yeah.
his legacy lives on. His family donated their former ranch at the bottom of the Norwegian Grade is now under the control of the Park and Rec here in
Right.
Thousand Oaks, so
Yeah.
it'll be enjoyed for families for decades to come.
Joel was always helping the boys' clubs and the scouts, and he was very good to help all of them.
Joel came to my retirement dinner. Him and his Dee.
What a great family. What was it like being on Joel McRae's ranch back then?
Just like being on anybody's.
Yeah.
You wouldn't know he was a movie star at all. He was just just like any rancher. He loved horses.
I remember when I was a kid, my dad was raising alfalfa over in Simi Valley, and Joe McRae came over and wanted to buy the alfalfa, and they sat around out there in the alfalfa field and talked just as like next door neighbor,
Never would have thought the guy was a movie star.
No, never would.
He was a great old rancher. It just says a lot about the people, I think, who pioneered this area. They were so giving to some of the institutions that we have now. Again, Boys and Girls Clubs in the area and YMCA, and a lot of our open space and our park and rec were all donated by some of the early pioneers
Yeah.
here in the Conejo Valley. It's a great legacy to leave for people who just have arrived. They didn't
Yeah.
know what this area was like. Now, the movie sets were always fun. I
Yeah.
remember the movie sets where Wildwood is now, actually,
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
the east end of, or the west end of Avenida de los Arboles. I used to play out there as a kid.
Yeah.
I remember one that Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis made over on by Sherwood Lake. And that was quite a movie set too. Dean Martin was a real character on the set, believe me.
And he lived out there in Hidden Valley for a while.
I'm not sure where he lived, but that movie was taken there.
There were several that lived over there
Yeah.
by the lake.
Yeah.
But,
Oh, any real memorable experiences that you had here in Thousand Oaks area that you want to share? Something that stands out?
Well, it's not very memorable, but when I was in charge out here, 3 of our deputies hit that big oak tree right there at Herbs
Herbs.
Road and the old boulevard, killed 2 of them instantly. It was a
Really?
very tragic thing.
What year was that?
That was back in about 66.
That's where
Kenny Place, and I don't know I can't think of the other kid's name. They were killed.
I can't remember who was with Kenny.
Yeah.
Well, that's a real tragedy because we've had very few deputies over the years lose their lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
to have 2 and 1 on a very, very small department.
That was a tough night.
What were they, what sort of a call were they on back then?
Well, they weren't on a call. They were in a private car
Oh,
and out doing a little celebrating.
crash. Yeah, the boulevard then was pretty narrow, and I know
Yeah,
actually
and that big old oak tree stood right in the middle of it.
right in the middle of the street.
Yeah. I was surprised that they ever moved it. That people let them take that out, to tell you the
Yeah.
truth.
Yeah.
It
Well,
was
how
a
about
big
with you?
one.
Any?
Well, I didn't spend a whole lot of time in Thousand Oaks after the resident deputy era. I came back as chief at the station on Olson Road for a few months. I was there when the Manson murder went on, and we had arrested the whole Manson crew over on Sycamore. But I was, being the chief, I was involved in it. They took them all to Ventura Jail and ID'd them, made a card, but we had to release them. We had nothing on them. But when I was out Thousand Oaks, the attorney for them, Bugliosi, he came out and we talked quite a while about Manson and his case with them. But I didn't spend a whole lot of time after that. I was transferred to Ventura and I worked in administration there in the later years.
Well, you bring up a good story talking about Charles Manson
Yeah.
because the most famous photograph of Charles Manson, the one that appeared on Time magazine, was our booking photo
Yeah,
of Charles Manson.
yeah. I was the chief, and one of the deputies run across him down at Sycamore, and one of the girls had just had a baby in the bus, and they were all fouled up. So we had him bring them to Ventura, and we booked them or ID'd them all. As I say, we had nothing to really hold them on.
And that was probably just a couple of months before they committed the murders, I believe.
Uh,
A year?
Yeah, at least a couple of months. Could have been 3 months. But they went from there back to Sycamore, and then they went over to the Spawn Ranch over there off of Santa Susana Pass, and that's where they were when the murders occurred.
And the Spawn Ranch was part of our patrol area there as well, because that's in the Box Canyon area.
Yeah.
And
Well, this was where they were was after you go over the top, down on the other side. It was on the left, so it was actually in L.A. County.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
Speaking of Box Canyon, Merle and I both worked up there on the Chris Nevada case when they blew him up and several others in that.
that was 1968, if I remember correct.
I found his hand up on the side of the hill, still had his ring on it.
Now, what murder case? What was he?
That group that lived there in Box Canyon was known as the WKFL, World Faith, Knowledge, and Love. And it was a religious order that the people would come in there and turn over all their worldly goods to this head of that. And they were to keep them and feed them and house them the rest of their lives. Well, a woman come up there with 2 kids and started staying with them. Her husband had been trying to get her back, and they wouldn't let her go. One night, he and a friend came up on the porch of this house where Cush and Avena lived. It was kind of a 3-story place, and they were on the porch, which was a screened-in porch all the way around the side of it. And they were carrying a satchel. Well, they wouldn't let his wife and kids come out, so he triggered 40 sticks of 80-proof dynamite right there on the porch. It blew that house and everything around so far that nobody identified. There was 10 people killed, and the only way we identified him was, like John said, he found the hand up on the hill. And he had left a tape. The reason we know that's the way it happened, he had left a tape in the pickup that they drove up in, where they'd he and this friend of his had made the tape describing what they had in the satchel, the 40 sticks of 80 proof, why they were doing it, and everything was right there on tape.
The empty box of dynamite was still in the back of the pickup.
That would have been quite a case.
We also worked another case that Ma Duncan case. Merle and I was in the main office. We weren't actually out, but we was running it from the main office. And that was kind of an interesting case.
They just had a big story on an anniversary of that case.
Yeah.
It was in the newspaper a couple months ago.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
she was the last woman, I believe, executed in
I think
California.
so.
I think so.
And
Yeah.
she killed her
Daughter-in-law.
daughter-in-law.
Daughter-in-law. She had him killed. Had her
That's,
killed.
Had her, yeah, that's right.
Two
They hired
Mexican boys from
3 Mexican boys from
Camarillo.
Camarillo.
Now, we have any major serious homicide events in Thousand Oaks during your tenure?
I don't recall.
I
any.
don't recall any.
So we were the safest city back
Yeah.
then, and we're still
Still the safest city,
Okay.
I investigated and arrested the first capital offender in Ventura County. He was the first one to ever get the death sentence. It occurred in Moore Park, or actually Santa Susana. He burglarized a gun show to steal some guns, then went out and practiced with them, then went to her house and waited from 7 o'clock till midnight. She had company, the guy left. He walks in and shoots her twice, once in the head and once in the chest, and then took off a foot. Well, another deputy and I found him about daylight that morning. He was lying on a bed, an old bed in a shack. There was a door opening but no door on it. There was a window, and he was lying there and I could see his feet. We walked in and he was laying with his arms crossed. I put that shotgun right in the end of his nose. And when he woke up, I told him to lay still. He had a loaded gun in each hand. And he said if he'd been awake, we'd have had to kill him, but we arrested him without incident.
It was a Wild West.
Roy Gustafson was the district attorney. He prosecuted it, and he was the first one to get the death sentence in Ventura County.
You know, what's interesting from the stories you're telling me, it really seems that you guys were the group that transitioned Ventura County, Thousand Oaks, from a rural, Wild West area to the modern,
Yeah.
great suburban life that we enjoy now, because you saw the modernization, you led the sheriff department, you led the police department here in Thousand Oaks as we became a 21st century city and a great place for families to grow up. Because, if you went from 20 or 30 deputies to the 800 that we have in the department now, the specialties we have, and
We're seeing a lot of changes.
a lot of changes.
A lot of changes.
Okay. How do you want history to remember you guys? This is what the show's all about.
Well, I haven't given it any thought. I just, as far as the law enforcement is concerned, I would just like to have them remember that we did our job.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, too, that's important, you guys won't say it, but I will, is that you set an example for the rest of us to follow. And we're very proud of the Ventura County Sheriff Department. We're very, very proud of the fact that we provide Thousand Oaks with a premier police department, and you were there at the beginning, and that's important to us because we have that legacy to uphold.
I trained your sheriff well. Bob Brooks went to work for me.
There you go. He's a great guy to work for,
Yeah.
too. You trained him well.
Yeah.
So. All right. Thank you both for being here today.
Well, thank you
Our
for having
pleasure.
us.
It's a great show.
Been a pleasure.
All right.